The echo of hurried footsteps and frustrated sighs filled the crowded airport terminal. Elliot Harper clutched his messenger bag tightly as he navigated the chaos, his laptop balanced precariously in one hand, a lukewarm coffee in the other. Overhead, the monotonous hum of travel advisories mixed with cheerful holiday jingles, but Elliot barely noticed. Deadlines loomed, and Christmas was just a logistical hurdle he hadn't planned for. The flight board loomed ahead, a wall of flickering red updates, each cancellation announcement punctuated by groans of exasperation from stranded travelers. Elliot scanned the list until his stomach sank. Flight 472 to Minneapolis, canceled. His fingers tightened around his coffee cup, crumpling it slightly. Unbelievable, he muttered. It wasn't that he particularly wanted to be home for Christmas, but the alternative, explaining to his mother why he wasn't, felt worse. 5 years of missed family gatherings and generic gift cards sent through the mail had already earned him a reputation as the absent sibling. And now, thanks to a blizzard, his plan to make a brief, business-like appearance was unraveling fast. "Attention passengers," an airline attendant called over the intercom. "Due to severe weather conditions, all flights to Minneapolis are suspended until further notice. Please proceed to customer service for assistance." Elliot joined the herd of disgruntled passengers lining up at the service desk, his thoughts racing. Rescheduling would mean losing another day, and another day away from work meant another mountain of emails and unfinished projects. His stomach churned as he imagined his boss's clipped tone when deadlines weren't met. When he finally reached the counter, the attendant offered an apologetic smile. "The soonest we can rebook you is tomorrow afternoon," she said. "But there's an overnight train departing from Union Station in 2 hours. It's not as fast, but it'll get you to Minneapolis by morning." "A train?" Elliot repeated, the word foreign on his tongue. He hadn't taken a train since childhood, back when his grandfather insisted it was the best way to travel. Elliot dismissed the idea. Immediately, trains were slow, inefficient, and inconvenient. But then his mother's voice echoed in his mind. "Just this once, Ellie. It would mean so much to have you here." He exhaled sharply, his resistance crumbling. "Fine," he said reluctantly. "I'll take the train." Union Station was a stark contrast to the airport's chaos. The vaulted ceilings and distant hiss of a locomotive created an almost calming atmosphere. Clutching his ticket, Elliot scanned for his platform as the station clock struck 8, snow swirling outside the tall windows. He found his car near the middle of the train, a sleeper with faded upholstery and a faint smell of pine cleaner. Settling into his seat by the window, he pulled out his laptop, determined to salvage what was left of the evening. The glow of the screen illuminated his face as he typed furiously, the soft hum of the train starting up barely registering. "Long way from home?" a voice interrupted. Elliot glanced up, startled. A man had taken the seat across from him. He appeared to be in his 70s, with a kind face framed by silver hair and a worn gray overcoat. In his hands, he cradled a steaming mug of cocoa, the faint aroma of chocolate and cinnamon wafting through the air. "Not really," Elliot replied tersely, hoping the man would take the hint and leave him alone. But the man smiled, undeterred. "You look busy," he observed. "Too busy for Christmas?" Elliot resisted the urge to sigh. "Deadlines," he said curtly. "They don't stop for the holidays." The man chuckled softly, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Funny thing about deadlines, they come and go. But memories?" He tapped his temple. "Those last." Elliot forced a tight smile, turning back to his laptop. "Right." The man fell silent, but his presence lingered like a question Elliot didn't want to answer. Outside, the snow fell heavier, blanketing the world in quiet stillness. The rhythmic clatter of the train wheels filled the air, their steady tempo oddly soothing. By the time the train reached its first stop, Elliot had made little progress on his work. His thoughts kept wandering to the stranger's words, and the unfamiliar warmth of the train car only amplified his restlessness. As the train idled at a small station, the man stood, adjusting his scarf. "Care to stretch your legs?" he asked, his tone casual, but his eyes twinkling with something almost mischievous. Elliot shook his head. "I have work to do." "Work can wait," the man replied with a knowing smile. "But suit yourself." He stepped into the aisle, glancing back briefly before disappearing into the crowd. Relieved to be alone, Elliot returned to his laptop, though the words on the screen blurred as his focus wavered. Something about the man had unsettled him, not in a threatening way, but in a way that felt uncomfortably personal. Then, he noticed it. A small, folded piece of paper sitting on the seat where the man had been. Frowning, Elliot picked it up. Written in neat, old-fashioned script was a single name: Henry L. Harper. Elliot's chest tightened. That name, his grandfather's name. He looked up, scanning the train car, but the man was gone. A shiver ran through him, though the car was warm. How could a stranger know his grandfather's name, a name that hadn't been spoken outside his family in years? The train began moving again, pulling away from the station and into the snowy night. Elliot sat frozen, the note clutched in his hand. Questions buzzed in his mind, each more unsettling than the last. Who was the man? And what did he want? The train plunged into a dark tunnel, the sudden shift in light casting Elliot's reflection against the window. In the glass, he saw himself holding the note, and just beyond his reflection, the faint outline of the man standing at the far end of the car, watching him. The train rattled on through the night, its steady rhythm the only constant in Elliot's swirling thoughts. He couldn't stop staring at the note in his hand, the name written there pulling him into memories he thought he'd buried long ago. Henry L. Harper, his grandfather. The man who had made Christmas magical when Elliot was a child, with his booming laugh and seemingly endless supply of stories. Henry was the kind of person who could make even the most ordinary moments feel extraordinary. But he'd been gone for years, his absence leaving a void in the family that no one, least of all Elliot, had been able to fill. "Nice night for a mystery, isn't it?" The voice startled Elliot out of his reverie. He looked up to find the man standing in the aisle, holding 2 steaming mugs of cocoa. "Mind if I join you again?" Elliot hesitated but nodded, gesturing to the empty seat. The man sat down, sliding one of the mugs across the table toward him. "Thought you might need a warm-up," the man said, smiling. Elliot stared at the mug but didn't touch it. "All right," he said, his tone edged with suspicion. "Who are you? And how do you know that name?" The man leaned back, his expression calm. "Let's just say I knew your grandfather. We shared a lot of good times." "That's not an answer," Elliot shot back. "He's been gone for over a decade. You couldn't have—" "Time isn't as straightforward as you think," the man interrupted gently. "And sometimes it bends just enough to give us a second chance." Elliot frowned, his patience thinning. "You're not making any sense." The man regarded him for a moment, his gaze both kind and unnervingly knowing. "Tell me something, Elliot. When was the last time you felt truly at home?" The question landed like a weight in Elliot's chest. He opened his mouth to respond, but the answer wouldn't come. Instead, images flashed in his mind. His sister Emma begging him to stay longer the last time he visited, his mother's forced smile as he hurried out the door, the empty chair at the dinner table where his grandfather used to sit. "I don't know," Elliot admitted finally, his voice quieter than he intended. The man nodded, as if he'd expected the answer. "It's easy to lose track, isn't it? To let the years slip by while you're chasing something you think matters more." Elliot bristled. "I have responsibilities, a career. It's not like I can just drop everything and—" "And what?" the man interrupted, his tone still gentle. "Spend a few hours with the people who love you? Share a story, a laugh, a meal? How much time would it really cost you, Elliot?" Elliot didn't answer. He didn't have one. The train slowed as it approached a small town, the lights of the station flickering in the distance. Snow coated the rooftops and tree branches, giving the scene a postcard-like quality. The man stood, adjusting his scarf. "Come with me," he said. Elliot hesitated. "Where?" "Just for a moment," the man replied, his tone inviting yet insistent. "You'll want to see this." Against his better judgment, Elliot followed. The train doors hissed open, and they stepped onto the platform. The cold was biting, but the air was crisp and clean, carrying the faint scent of pine and chimney smoke. The man led Elliot through the station and into the town square. The place was alive with holiday cheer, a towering Christmas tree adorned with twinkling lights, children laughing as they skated on an ice rink, and vendors selling roasted chestnuts and steaming cider. It was the kind of scene Elliot had seen 100 times in movies, but hadn't experienced in years. "Do you remember what this felt like?" the man asked, gesturing toward the festive scene. Elliot didn't respond right away. Instead, his eyes were drawn to a boy and his father at one of the vendor stalls. The father handed the boy a wrapped package, and the boy's face lit up with joy. The sight sent a pang through Elliot's chest. It reminded him of the Christmas when his grandfather had given him the train set. The way Henry's eyes had sparkled as he told Elliot to imagine all the places it could take you. "It's not the same," Elliot said finally. "People grow up. Things change." "True," the man replied, "but some things don't. The joy of giving, the comfort of traditions, the love that binds a family together, those are yours to carry forward if you choose to." Elliot shook his head, his defenses rising again. "You make it sound so simple, but it's not. Life gets in the way." The man turned to him, his expression serious now. "Life doesn't get in the way, Elliot. You do." The words stung, and for a moment, Elliot couldn't meet the man's gaze. He knew there was truth in them, but admitting it felt too raw, too vulnerable. They returned to the train, the festive sounds of the square fading behind them. Elliot settled back into his seat, his mind heavy with conflicting emotions. The man didn't sit this time, but lingered in the aisle. "Why are you doing this?" Elliot asked finally, his voice tinged with frustration. "Why do you care?" The man smiled faintly. "Because it's Christmas, and Christmas is about second chances." The train's whistle blew, signaling its departure. The man adjusted his scarf again and tipped his hat. "Good night, Elliot. I'll see you soon." Before Elliot could respond, the man disappeared into the next car. Elliot stared after him, feeling both unsettled and strangely comforted. Elliot reached into his pocket and pulled out the note again, his grandfather's name staring back at him like a challenge. He flipped it over this time and saw a line written on the back. "Remember the story about the cabin?" His heart skipped a beat. He knew the story well. It had been his favorite Christmas tale as a child. But there was one problem. The story had always been a work of fiction. Or so he thought. The train rattled deeper into the snowy wilderness, the rhythmic clatter of its wheels mingling with the muffled hush of the storm outside. Elliot sat motionless, staring at the note in his hands. "Remember the story about the cabin?" The words tugged at his memory, unlocking a flood of images he hadn't thought about in years. When he was a boy, his grandfather, Henry, used to tell him bedtime stories about a magical cabin hidden deep in the woods. The cabin was said to appear only on Christmas Eve, glowing with warmth and light, and inside, anything a person truly needed would reveal itself. It was just a silly tale to coax a child to sleep, or at least, that's what Elliot had always believed. But now, with the note in his hand and the memory of the mysterious man still fresh in his mind, doubt began to creep in. What if it wasn't just a story? The train slowed again, this time stopping at a desolate platform surrounded by snow-covered pines. Outside, the world seemed impossibly quiet, the kind of stillness that made Elliot's pulse quicken. "Ladies and gentlemen," the conductor announced over the intercom, "we'll be stopped here briefly due to icy conditions on the tracks. Please remain aboard." Elliot glanced out the window, his breath fogging the glass. In the distance, he saw a faint light flickering through the trees, soft and warm, like the glow of a fireplace. His chest tightened. It couldn't be. Before he could think better of it, Elliot stood, shrugging on his coat and scarf. He moved toward the nearest exit, his heart pounding. Stepping onto the platform, the cold air bit at his face, but he barely felt it. The light was still there, flickering invitingly through the trees. "You're going to freeze out there." The voice startled him, and he turned to see the mysterious man standing a few feet away, his gray coat dusted with snow. "You again?" Elliot asked, his voice a mix of surprise and frustration. "What do you want from me?" "It's not about what I want," the man said, his tone calm and even. "It's about what you're searching for." Elliot hesitated, torn between skepticism and the undeniable pull of curiosity. "What's out there?" he asked, nodding toward the light in the woods. The man's lips curved into a faint smile. Only one way to find out. Elliot exhaled sharply, his breath forming clouds in the icy air. Against his better judgment, he stepped off the platform and onto the snowy trail leading into the woods. The man followed silently, his footsteps crunching softly behind. The trail wound deeper into the forest, the towering trees casting long shadows in the moonlight. Elliot's breath came in quick bursts, each exhale visible in the frigid air. As they walked, memories of his grandfather's stories swirled in his mind. "Do you really believe in all this?" Elliot asked over his shoulder. "The cabin, the magic, it's just a story." "Is it?" the man replied, his voice steady. "Or is it something you've always been too afraid to believe in?" Elliot didn't respond. He didn't know how to. The idea of magic, of something greater than himself, was both exhilarating and terrifying. Finally, they reached a clearing, and Elliot froze. There it was, the cabin. Just as his grandfather had described it, small and rustic, with warm golden light spilling from its windows and smoke curling from the chimney. Snow blanketed the roof and the ground surrounding it, undisturbed except for their own footprints. "This can't be real," Elliot whispered. "It's as real as you're willing to let it be," the man said. "Go on." Elliot approached the cabin cautiously, his heart pounding in his chest. The door was slightly ajar, and a faint melody drifted out, soft, familiar tune that made his throat tighten. Silent night. Pushing the door open, he stepped inside. The warmth hit him immediately, wrapping around him like a comforting embrace. The room was cozy, with a roaring fire in the hearth and a Christmas tree twinkling in the corner. On the mantel above the fireplace were photographs, images of his family, spanning generations. His eyes landed on one in particular, a black and white photo of his grandfather, standing proudly in front of the same train set that had sat under their family Christmas tree every year. The train was there too, circling the base of the tree, its rhythmic chugging filling the quiet space. Elliot's knees felt weak as he sank into a nearby armchair. "How is this possible?" he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. "Magic, maybe," the man said, stepping inside. "Or maybe it's just a reminder of what matters." Elliot turned to him, his frustration bubbling to the surface. "Why are you doing this? What's the point of all this? This show?" The man's expression softened. "To show you what you've been missing. To remind you of the things that don't wait. Family, love, time. You've spent years running, Elliot. But at some point, you have to stop. You have to go back." Elliot looked away, his chest tightening. "I don't know how," he admitted. "I've been gone too long. What if they don't want me back?" The man stepped closer, placing a hand on Elliot's shoulder. "It's never too late, but you have to take the first step." Before Elliot could respond, the room began to shimmer, the edges of the cabin dissolving like melting snow. He tried to stand, to call out, but the warmth around him faded, replaced by the familiar hum of the train. When he opened his eyes, he was back in his seat, the cabin and the mangone. He sat up, his breath coming in quick, shallow bursts. His hands were trembling, and when he looked down, he realized he was still clutching the note. But something had changed. On the back of the paper, new words had appeared. "You'll find the answer at home." Elliot stared at the message, a wave of determination rising within him. He didn't fully understand what had happened, but he knew one thing. He couldn't let this chance slip away. As the train pulled into Minneapolis, The platform was already bustling with holiday travelers. Elliot stepped off, his eyes scanning the crowd. He spotted his mother and sister waiting near the exit, their faces lighting up as they saw him. Clutching the note tightly, Elliot took a deep breath and started toward them, a strange but undeniable sense of hope filling his chest. But just as he was about to call out to them, he caught a glimpse of something or someone at the edge of the platform. The man in the gray coat was standing there, watching him with a faint smile, and just as quickly as Elliot saw him, he was gone. The train hissed as it pulled away from the station, leaving Elliot standing on the platform, his breath clouding in the cold air. His mother and sister were there, just steps away, waving eagerly. For a moment, he stood frozen, the weight of the past 5 years pressing on him. Could he really make things right? The note in his pocket felt heavier than ever. "You'll find the answer at home." He didn't fully understand what had happened on the trainer in the woods, but he knew one thing. This was his chance to stop running. "Ellie!" Emma called, snapping him from his thoughts. Her voice carried the same warmth it had when they were kids, laughing together as they made snow angels in the front yard. Elliot managed to smile, stepping forward. "Hey, Em," he said, his voice cracking slightly as he embraced her. Their mother joined them, pulling him into a tight hug. "I was starting to think I'd never get you back for Christmas," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Elliot managed a shaky laugh. "Remember when I ruined the Christmas tree lights because I tried to plug in that old gaming console?" Emma chuckled, and Grandpa stayed up all night rewiring them so Mom wouldn't notice. Their mother smiled, her eyes shimmering with tears. "He always said you had more enthusiasm than sense." "I'm sorry," Elliot said, the words spilling out before he could stop them. "For all the years I missed. I should have—" "You're here now," she interrupted, squeezing his arm. "That's what matters." As they walked to the car, Elliot found himself stealing glances at the snow-covered trees lining the streets, half expecting to see the man in the gray coat watching from the shadows. But the forest remained quiet, undisturbed. That evening, the Harper home was alive with the sounds of Christmas Emma stringing lights around the tree while their mother hummed carols in the kitchen. The familiar smell of pine and cinnamon filled the air, and for the first time in years, Elliot felt a sense of belonging. "Found something you might like," Emma said, handing him a dusty box. Inside was the old train set their grandfather had given him, its paint chipped, but its charm intact. Elliot chuckled, running his fingers over the tiny locomotive. "I thought this was long gone." "Mom kept it," Emma said. "She always hoped you'd come back to set it up." Elliot swallowed the lump in his throat, carefully placing the train on the floor around the base of the tree. As he connected the tracks, he remembered his grandfather's words. "Imagine all the places it can take you." When the train was assembled, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the small key the mysterious man had given him. It fit perfectly into the train's winding mechanism. As he turned the key, the locomotive sputtered to life, its tiny wheels whirring as it began its journey around the tree. The train's rhythmic chugging seemed to cast a spell over the room. Emma and their mother sat beside him, their eyes glistening as they watched the train make its first full circle. Suddenly, a faint, warm light illuminated the tracks, and Elliot felt his breath catch. Inside the train's tiny passenger cars were miniature scenes from their family's past. A Christmas morning when they were kids, unwrapping gifts by the fire, their grandfather reading them a story as the snow fell outside, their parents dancing in the living room, laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. Elliot's mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. That's us," she whispered. The scenes shifted, showing moments from years Elliot had missed. Emma decorating the tree alone, their mother sitting quietly by the fire, holding a framed photograph of Henry. "I didn't know," Elliot said, his voice breaking. "I didn't realize how much I'd missed." Emma reached over, placing a hand on his arm. "It's not too late, Ellie. We can start again." Elliot nodded, tears streaming down his face as the train completed another circle. This time, the scenes showed something new. The three of them sitting together, laughing, with a vibrant Christmas tree behind them. A future not yet written, but full of possibility. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of laughter, stories, and memories. As the night deepened, Elliot found himself untangling strings of lights with Emma while their mother baked gingerbread cookies. The air was filled with laughter as they argued over the best way to decorate the tree. "You're still terrible at this," Emma teased, shaking her head at his unevenly spaced ornaments. Elliot smirked, hanging a lopsided star at the top. "Maybe, but it's about the effort, right?" His mother placed a tray of cookies on the table, her smile radiant. "It's good to have you back, Ellie. We missed you." Elliot reached for a cookie, still warm from the oven, the scent of cinnamon and sugar filling the air. His mother and sister watched as he took a bite, their laughter soft but genuine. As they sat by the fire, Elliot felt a warmth he hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't just the glow of the flames or the comfort of being home, it was the feeling of being part of something bigger than himself. Later that night, as the house fell quiet, Elliot stepped outside to clear his head. The snow had stopped, leaving the world pristine and silent. He stood on the porch, gazing at the stars, when he saw a figure at the edge of the yard. The man in the gray coat. Elliot walked toward him, his breath catching in the cold air. "You," he said, his tone both accusatory and grateful. "You planned all of this." The man smiled, his face lit by the faint glow of the porch lights. "I didn't plan anything," he said. "I just gave you a nudge." "Who are you?" Elliot asked. "Why did you help me?" The man tipped his hat, his smile widening. "Let's just say I had a promise to keep. Your grandfather believed in giving people the chance to see what really matters. He asked me to look out for you when the time came." Elliot's breath caught. "You knew him?" The man tipped his hat, his expression fond. "He was one of the best. Made me promise I wouldn't let you forget." Before Elliot could ask more, the man turned and walked into the woods, his figure fading into the shadows. For a moment, Elliot thought he heard the faint whistle of a train in the distance, but when he strained to listen, the sound was gone. And yet, the man's words echoed in his thoughts, each one carrying the unmistakable cadence of his grandfather's voice. It was as if Henry himself had been standing there, guiding him home. Elliot returned to the house, pausing to take one last look at the glowing windows and the warmth inside. He thought of his grandfather, the stories he used to tell, and the train set that had somehow brought them all back together. For the first time in years, Elliot felt truly at peace. He wasn't just home in the physical sense, he was home in his heart, connected to the people who mattered most. As he stepped inside, the faint sound of the train filled the air, its steady rhythm a gentle reminder of the journey that had brought him back. In that moment, Elliot realized it wasn't just the train that had carried him, it was love, memory, and the hope of new beginnings. And for the first time in years, he smiled not out of obligation, but out of joy.